You're not his father, Brian. You can't take away his phone. The words sliced through the evening air at the Hendersons' backyard barbecue, and Brian Johnson felt 30 pairs of eyes turned toward him. He was holding Joshua's phone in his hand, the screen still glowing with some video game the 14-year-old had been playing instead of eating. Brian had only taken it because that morning Joshua's English teacher had called to say he hadn't turned in his last 3 essays, and his geometry grade had dropped to AD. "Joshua, you promised you'd finish that history project this weekend," Brian had said quietly, slipping the phone into his pocket. "We talked about this. No screens until your assignments are caught up." Joshua's face had flushed red. "Mom?" Brian took my phone. Jessica had been laughing with the other mothers near the grill, a glass of Moscato in her hand, but she crossed the patio in 6 sharp steps. Her smile was gone. "Brian, what are you doing?" "He's 3 weeks behind in English and failing geometry," Brian said, keeping his voice low so the neighbors wouldn't hear everything. "We agreed this morning, phone privileges come back when the grades come up. Give it back to him." Jessica held out her hand like he was a child himself. "Jess, we talked about." Her voice rose, crystalline and cutting. "You're not his father, Brian. You can't take away his phone." The Hendersons' yard went silent except for the hiss of the grill. Someone's paper plate dropped. Mr. Chin stopped flipping burgers. The teenage girls in the corner stopped their conversation to watch. Joshua stood there with his hand extended, waiting, a small smile playing at his lips like he'd just won something. Brian looked at the phone in his hand, the one he'd bought Joshua for Christmas on the plan he paid for every month. He looked at his wife, whose face showed no uncertainty, no apology. He looked at Joshua, who wouldn't meet his eyes. He placed the phone in Jessica's outstretched palm, turned without a word and walked to his truck. Behind him, he heard Jessica say brightly, "Sorry everyone, just a little family disagreement," followed by forced laughter. Brian sat in the truck with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel. 6 years. 6 years of helping with homework and attending parent-teacher conferences and staying up until midnight working through algebra problems together. 6 years of checking assignment notebooks and celebrating improved test scores and being the one who actually showed up to school events. And she just told an entire neighborhood that he had no right to parent the boy he'd raised. He started the engine and drove home. By the time Jessica and Joshua arrived 30 minutes later, still laughing about something from the party, Brian was in his home office with his laptop open, staring at a web page titled, "How to File for Divorce in California." His hand hovered over the mouse. Through the door he could hear Joshua's video game starting up, the volume loud, no homework being done. He could hear Jessica on the phone with her sister. "Yeah, he got all weird about the phone thing. He'll get over it. He always does." Brian clicked the link. "Please, before I continue, kindly like, share and subscribe for more interesting videos." Brian sat in his home office until 2 in the morning, the glow of his laptop casting shadows across framed photos he'd never really looked at before. There was Joshua at 8 years old, gap-toothed and holding a participation trophy from his first soccer season, the season Brian had coached. Another photo showed Joshua's 10th birthday, the Spider-Man party Brian had thrown together in 4 hours after Marcus had promised to come and never showed up. He remembered that day clearly now, like a wound reopening. Joshua had locked himself in his room, crying because his real dad wasn't coming. Brian had driven to 3 different stores finding Spider-Man decorations, had baked a cake from scratch using a YouTube tutorial, had called every kid in Joshua's class to invite them last minute. When Joshua came downstairs and saw what Brian had done, he'd wrapped his arms around Brian's waist and whispered, "I wish you were my real dad." Brian had said, "I'm as real as they come, buddy." But apparently he wasn't. Not to Jessica. Maybe not even to Joshua anymore. He opened his phone and started recording a voice memo, something his therapist had suggested years ago when he needed to process things. 6 years, he said quietly into the darkness. 6 first days of school. 6 birthday parties. I taught him to ride a bike in the park. I stayed up 3 nights straight when he had pneumonia and Jessica had to work. I'm in every school photo. Every soccer team picture. Every memory that matters. His voice cracked slightly. I paid for the private school when Marcus wouldn't send child support. I drove him to practice 4 times a week. I helped him build that volcano for the science fair that won 2nd place. I read Harry Potter to him every night for 2 years until he could read them himself. Through the door, he heard Jessica's footsteps in the hallway, then her getting into bed. She hadn't come to check on him. Hadn't apologized. She probably thought he was sulking, that he'd be fine by morning. Brian looked at the divorce attorney website still open on his screen. His father had left when Brian was 10, had said, "You're not my responsibility anymore." Brian had vowed never to abandon a child, biological or not. He kept that vow. But he'd never vowed to stay in a marriage where he was treated like hired help instead of a husband, where his role as a parent could be revoked in front of an audience over a phone. He started filling out the consultation form. Thursday morning, Brian woke up before his alarm and lay in bed watching Jessica sleep. She looked peaceful, undisturbed, like nothing had happened. He wondered how long she'd been thinking of him as not the father. Months? Years? Had it always been there, unspoken, waiting for the right moment to be weaponized? He got up quietly and went to work like normal. At his desk at Morrison Engineering, he opened a separate browser window and began documenting. He screenshot every text message where Jessica had undermined his parenting. There were more than he'd realized. "Just let him skip practice, he's tired. You're too strict about bedtime. Stop pushing him so hard about grades. He doesn't need to do chores, he's stressed enough." Then he found the messages to her sister that made his stomach turn. From 3 months ago, "Brian's on my nerves about Joshua's report card. Like he's some perfect parent. He's just the stepdad, not the real thing." From last Christmas, Brian spent $300 on Joshua's presents. "I didn't ask him to do all that. He acts like he's trying to replace Marcus." But the one that made him close his laptop and step outside for air was from 2 weeks ago. "Honestly, I keep Brian around because he pays for stuff and Joshua's gotten used to him. But he needs to remember his place." His place. Brian stood in the parking lot, breathing slowly. Cars drove past. Someone called his name from across the lot, but he didn't turn around. He'd spent 6 years believing he was building a family. Jessica had spent 6 years managing a convenient arrangement. That afternoon he opened a new checking account at a different bank. He began transferring his paychecks there. He called his lawyer and scheduled a consultation for Monday. He went through their finances meticulously, every bill, every account, every asset. The house was in both names. The cars were in both names. But Joshua's phone plan, the private school tuition, the health insurance that covered Joshua, all Brian. Friday evening, Jessica noticed he was quiet. "You're not still mad about the phone thing, are you?" she asked while scrolling through Instagram. "No," Brian said. "I'm fine." She smiled, relieved, and went back to her screen. Brian booked a U-Haul for Saturday morning. Saturday arrived cold and gray, the marine layer hanging thick over the neighborhood. Brian woke at 5 a.m. before Jessica and Joshua, and began moving systematically through the house. Everything that belonged to Jessica or Joshua went into boxes, bags, and bins. Clothes from their closets. Joshua's gaming setup. Jessica's shoes and jewelry and decorative pillows. The artwork she'd chosen. Joshua's soccer trophies and school projects. He worked quietly, efficiently, like he was managing a construction site. By 7 a.m., the U-Haul was parked in the driveway and he'd begun carrying everything to the front lawn. He arranged it neatly, he wasn't cruel, just done. Furniture stacked carefully. Boxes labeled clearly. Joshua's bike leaning against the mailbox. Mrs. Henderson walked past with her dog at 7:30 and stopped dead. "Brian? What's happening?" "Spring cleaning," he said, carrying out Joshua's desk. By 8 a.m., half the neighborhood was awake and watching from their windows. Brian knew they were. He didn't care. He moved the couch next, the one Jessica had insisted they buy even though it didn't fit the living room right. Then her dresser. Then Joshua's entire bedroom set. At 8:15, Jessica's alarm went off inside. Brian heard her moving around, heard the shower start, heard her humming. She had no idea. At 8:40, the front door opened. Jessica stepped out in her bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, probably going to get the newspaper. She froze on the porch. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "What? Brian, what are you doing?" "Moving you out," he said calmly, setting down another box of her clothes. "This is my house. It's our house. But you made it very clear I'm not Joshua's father, so I'm not responsible for housing him. Or you." Her face went white then red. "You can't, this is insane. Brian." Joshua appeared in the doorway behind her, looking sleepy and confused. Then he saw the lawn. His gaming chair. His TV. His closet's contents spread across the grass. His face crumpled. "Mom? You said I wasn't his father," Brian said, meeting Jessica's eyes. "So I'm not acting like it anymore." Neighbors were definitely watching now. Mr. Chin was on his porch, phone out. The Martinez kids were staring from their driveway. Jessica spent an hour screaming, crying, threatening to call the police. Brian simply said, "Call them. This is a civil matter." You'll need to get a court order to force me to let you back in, and that takes weeks. I'm not threatening you. I'm not touching you. I'm exercising my right to decide who lives in my home. Our home. Which I've been paying the mortgage on for 6 years while Marcus paid nothing. You want to play the real father card? Call him. Joshua can live with his real father. That shut her up. But only for a moment. By noon, Jessica had called her mother, who arrived in a fury but quickly realized Brian was legally in the right to remove them from the property. They'd never updated the deed after marriage, so technically it was still his house from before they met. Then Jessica made the call Brian knew was coming. Marcus answered on the fourth ring. Yeah. Marcus, I need you to take Joshua for a while. Silence on the other end. Then, what? Why? Brian's lost his mind. We need a place to stay. We? Like both of you? Yes, Marcus. Your son needs you. Another long pause. Jess, I live in a one-bedroom. I barely have space for myself. Brian watched Jessica's face crumble as she realized her leverage had vanished. Marcus wasn't a backup plan. He was a deadbeat who'd been conveniently absent while Brian did all the work. It's temporary, Jessica said, her voice breaking. Please. Just until I figure this out. Marcus arrived 2 hours later in a 2004 Honda Civic with a dented bumper and expired registration tags. He looked older than his 40 years, thin and tired, wearing a wrinkled work shirt from some warehouse. He stared at the lawn full of belongings like he was watching a movie he didn't understand. So, Marcus said, hands in his pockets. You want to come stay with me? Joshua looked at his biological father, really looked at him, maybe for the first time with clear eyes. This wasn't the successful, apologetic dad he'd imagined would someday return. This was a stranger who'd forgotten his birthdays and ignored his calls and never once asked about his grades. I want to stay here, Joshua said quietly. Can't, Brian said from the doorway. Your mother made the rules clear. 3 days later, Jessica was living in her mother's guest room, sleeping on a decades-old futon while Joshua took the pull-out couch in the living room. She'd called Brian 47 times. He'd blocked her number. She'd emailed him. He'd set up an auto-response directing her to communicate only through his attorney. On Wednesday afternoon, a process server knocked on her mother's door. Jessica answered in sweatpants and one of Brian's old t-shirts she'd grabbed from the lawn, her hair unwashed, her eyes still puffy from crying. Jessica Martinez Johnson? Yes. You've been served. He handed her a manila envelope and left. Her hands shook as she opened it. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Her eyes scanned the legal language, not quite understanding until she reached Section 7. Petitioner requests no financial responsibility for minor child Joshua David Martinez, non-biological. Petitioner has provided voluntary support for 6 years but is not the legal father and requests all future support obligations be directed to biological father Marcus James Martinez. The paper slipped from her fingers. Her mother picked it up, read it, and said quietly, "Oh, honey. He's serious. He can't do this. He loves Joshua. He did love Joshua. You told him he wasn't the father. You can't have it both ways." Jessica grabbed her phone, her mother's phone, since hers was still on Brian's plan and he'd disconnected it, and called Brian's work number. His assistant answered. "I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson isn't taking calls from this number. Tell him it's urgent." "I'm sorry, ma'am. Have a good day." Jessica threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and cracked. Her mother didn't even flinch, just stared at her daughter with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "What did you think would happen, Jessica? You humiliated that man in front of the whole neighborhood. You threw away 6 years of devotion in one sentence." "I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" Jessica didn't have an answer. She'd meant it exactly like it sounded. Brian wasn't Joshua's real father, so he didn't get real father authority. She'd just never imagined he'd agree with her and walk away. A week after receiving the divorce papers, Jessica drove to Morrison Engineering at lunchtime. She'd made Joshua come with her, had rehearsed what she'd say, had even made Joshua write a "We're sorry" sign on poster board with markers like some romantic comedy apology scene. Brian's truck was in the parking lot. Her heart hammered as she parked next to it and waited. Other engineers came and went, some glancing at her curiously. She recognized a few from company picnics she'd attended. At 12:15, Brian emerged from the building with 2 co-workers, laughing about something. He stopped when he saw her. His face went carefully blank. "Brian?" Jessica jumped out, Joshua trailing behind her holding the sign. "Please, we need to talk." His co-workers exchanged glances. One of them, Tom, she thought his name was, said, Want us to stay? No, I'm fine. Brian's voice was calm, almost bored. He walked toward his truck. Jessica followed. Brian, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said at the barbecue. You are Joshua's father. You've always been. We need you. Brian unlocked his truck and put his lunch bag inside. Then he turned to face her. His eyes were different, not angry, not hurt, just empty. You meant it, Jessica. And I heard what you really think. I saw the text to your sister. Her stomach dropped. You went through my phone? I documented evidence for the divorce. Just the stepdad, not the real thing. I keep him around because he pays for stuff. Should I go on? Joshua's face went pale. Mom, you said that? Joshua, baby, I was just venting. You were telling the truth, Brian interrupted. And that's fine. You're entitled to your truth. But here's mine. My inner peace is worth more than this toxic marriage. I'm not coming back. Brian. He got in his truck and started the engine. Jessica banged on the window. Please? Joshua needs you. Brian rolled down the window an inch. Joshua needs a father. Marcus is his father. That's what you told me. That's what the court papers will reflect. I'm done being convenient. He backed out of the parking space. Joshua dropped the sign and it blew across the asphalt. Several people were filming from their cars. Later that night, shaky phone footage would circulate on neighborhood Facebook pages with comments ranging from, "That poor man," to "She really screwed up." Living with Marcus was nothing like Joshua had imagined during all those years of fantasizing about his real dad. The one-bedroom apartment smelled like stale cigarettes and microwaved burritos. Marcus worked swing shifts at an Amazon warehouse and slept until 2 p.m. on his days off. There were no family dinners. No help with homework. No one checking if Joshua had done his chores or finished his reading. The first week, Joshua kept waiting for Marcus to ask about school or friends or anything. Marcus mostly asked if Joshua wanted to order pizza or Chinese food. They ate in silence, Marcus scrolling through his phone, while some action movie played on the battered TV. Joshua's grades got worse. His English teacher emailed, to Brian's address, because Brian was still listed as the emergency contact. Joshua never knew if Brian responded. The guidance counselor called Marcus. Marcus said, "He's 14, he can handle his own homework," and hung up. On the 9th night at Marcus's apartment, Joshua lay on the air mattress on the living room floor and pulled out his phone, the same phone that had started everything. His battery was at 3% because Marcus never remembered to buy him a charging cable. He opened his messages and scrolled to Brian's number. The last text was from 2 months ago, a photo of Joshua's B+ on a geometry test with Brian's message, "Proud of you, buddy. Ice cream to celebrate?" Joshua's throat tightened. He typed, "Can I come home? I miss you." He stared at the screen for 20 minutes before 3 dots appeared. Then Brian's response came through, "That's not my decision anymore. Your mother made it clear, I'm not your father." Joshua read it 10 times. Then he put his phone face down and cried for the first time since he was 8 years old, that same kind of crying he'd done when Marcus had missed his birthday. Only this time, Brian wasn't going to show up with a Spider-Man cake and fix everything. This time Joshua had broken it himself. The mediation took place in a beige conference room that smelled like coffee and defeat. Jessica sat with her attorney, a young woman from a discount legal clinic who looked overwhelmed. Brian sat across from them with his lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s named Patricia Chen who'd handled his real estate closings and didn't suffer fools. The mediator, a tired-looking man named Henderson, began with the standard speech about cooperation and compromise. Jessica's lawyer jumped in immediately. "Mr. Johnson has been acting as a father figure to Joshua for 6 years. While we acknowledge he has no biological or legal relationship, California family law does recognize de facto parenthood. We're asking for Mr. Johnson to continue providing some financial support during the transition period." Patricia didn't even open her folder. "My client was told, and I quote, 'You're not his father.'" This statement was made publicly in front of witnesses when Mr. Johnson attempted to exercise parental authority. Mrs. Johnson cannot simultaneously claim he has no parental rights while requesting he maintain parental obligations. He voluntarily supported the child. Voluntarily. Which means he can voluntarily stop. He's not the biological father. He never adopted. There's no legal basis for support. Jessica's lawyer pulled out printed screenshots. "We have evidence that Mr. Johnson referred to himself as Joshua's father. School records list him as parent. He signed field trip permission slips. With Mrs. Johnson's permission and encouragement, until the moment she decided to revoke that role. You can't have it both ways. The mediator held up his hands. Let's hear from Mrs. Johnson. Can you explain what happened? Jessica's voice was small. I made a mistake. I was angry about the phone situation, and I said something I didn't mean. Brian is Joshua's father in every way that matters. Patricia slid a stapled document across the table. These are texts Mrs. Johnson sent to her sister over the past year. I'll read a few excerpts. He's just the stepdad, not the real thing. I keep him around because he pays for stuff and Joshua's gotten used to him. He needs to remember his place. Jessica's face went crimson. Her lawyer's face went pale. The mediator read through the messages and sighed. Mrs. Johnson, did you write these? I was venting to my sister. People say things they don't mean when they're frustrated. For a year? Patricia asked. Consistently? This isn't one bad day. This is a pattern of viewing my client as a financial resource rather than a family member. The mediator made notes. Henderson looked at Brian. Mr. Johnson, do you wish to maintain any relationship with the minor child? Brian's jaw worked for a moment. I spent 6 years loving that boy like he was my own. But I can't be in his life part-time while being told I have no authority and no real place. It's all or nothing, and his mother chose nothing. So your answer is no? My answer is I'm protecting myself from a situation where I'm used for resources but given no respect. If that means stepping back, then yes. The mediator looked at Jessica with something like pity. Petition granted. Mr. Johnson has no support obligation. Mrs. Johnson, you'll need to pursue child support from the biological father through the appropriate channels. Jessica's lawyer tried to argue, but it was over. They filed out of the conference room into the courthouse hallway. Jessica looked at Brian one last time. You're really going to abandon him? After everything? I'm not abandoning him. I was dismissed. There's a difference. He needs you. He needed me every day for 6 years. You made sure he knew I wasn't actually his father. Congratulations. You were right. Brian walked away without looking back. 6 months later, Brian sat in a therapist's office talking about forgiveness. Not forgiving Jessica, that was still too raw, but forgiving himself for staying too long in a dynamic where he was undervalued. You're allowed to have walked away, Dr. Morrison said. You're allowed to choose peace. Brian nodded. He'd spent 6 months working on himself. He'd started running again, something he'd given up when family schedules got busy. He'd reconnected with old friends who'd drifted away during the marriage. He'd renovated his house, removing every trace of Jessica and Joshua until it felt like his space again. And he'd started dating. Nothing serious at first, just coffee meetings and casual dinners. Then he'd matched with Sarah on Hinge, a 41-year-old architect who'd never been married and had no kids. She was direct in her profile, not looking to start a family, already happy with my life, just want someone to share it with. Their first date was at a quiet bistro downtown. She asked about his divorce within the first 20 minutes, not dancing around it. Ever been married? She asked over wine. Once. It didn't work out. Kids. Brian paused, testing how it felt to say out loud. My ex-wife had a son from a previous relationship. I helped raise him for 6 years. But I learned that love isn't enough when there's no respect or partnership. Sarah nodded slowly. That must have been hard. Walking away from a child you cared about. Hardest thing I've ever done. But staying would have destroyed me. I respect that. Too many people stay in toxic situations because they think leaving makes them the bad guy. They talked for 3 hours. Sarah made him laugh. She challenged his opinions. She didn't need him to rescue her or fix her or fund her life. She was already complete, just looking for companionship. When Brian got home that night, he looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and realized he was smiling genuinely for the first time in years. Not the tight, performative smile he'd worn around Jessica's family. A real one. His phone buzzed. Sarah, I had a great time tonight. Want to do it again? Brian typed back, definitely. He was healing. Finally. Jessica stood at the customer service counter of Target, scanning items for the 8th hour of her shift. Her feet ached. Her manager had already written her up twice for being late. Marcus's car kept breaking down and she had to take 2 buses to get to work. Joshua was failing 3 classes now. The school counselor had called 6 times. Marcus had stopped showing up to his own apartment half the week, crashing at some friend's place, leaving Jessica and Joshua to fend for themselves. She'd applied for state assistance. She'd filed for child support from Marcus. He'd laughed when the papers were served. Good luck getting blood from a stone, he told the server. Her mother had stopped offering to help, tired of Jessica's refusal to take accountability. "You chose pride over your family," her mother had said last time they spoke. "You can't unbake a cake, honey." During her lunch break, Jessica scrolled through Facebook and froze. There was Brian, tagged in photos at Ocean Beach, arm around a pretty brunette, both of them laughing. The comments were full of heart emojis. "You look so happy. Glad you found someone who deserves you. About time." Jessica stared at the photos until her vision blurred. Brian looked lighter somehow, younger. The permanent tension she'd gotten so used to seeing in his shoulders was gone. He'd moved on. He was happy. Without her. Without Joshua. She thought about that night at the Hendersons' barbecue, the moment that had ended everything. If she could go back, would she have kept her mouth shut? Let Brian take the phone? Backed him up like a partner should? But she couldn't go back. She could only stand here in her Target vest, scanning diapers and paper towels, watching her son fail, watching her ex-husband thrive, watching the life she'd taken for granted disappear like it had never been real. That night, Joshua was playing video games on the couch when she got home. Same phone, same games, same failing grades. The phone she'd defended. The phone that had cost them everything. "Turn that off and do your homework," she said. "What? You never make me." "Because I said so." Joshua looked at her with Brian's same disappointed expression. "You're not my boss." Jessica felt something break inside her. "Go to your room." "This isn't my room. It's Marcus's living room. I don't have a room anymore. Remember?" He was right. They didn't have rooms or home or stability. They had Marcus's ratty couch and her mother's pity and the consequences of Jessica's choice to humiliate the one man who'd actually shown up. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, Brian was shopping at Whole Foods on a Sunday morning when he turned down the cereal aisle and nearly collided with a shopping cart. He looked up and froze. Joshua stood there, taller now, maybe 5'9", wearing a wrinkled hoodie and jeans that didn't fit right. He'd grown his hair out and looked thinner. Older. Tired. "Brian," Joshua said, his voice cracking slightly. "Joshua." Brian's hand tightened on his own cart handle. "How are you?" Okay. Living with Mom still. At Grandma's." He looked down. "School's okay." The lie hung between them. Brian had heard from a mutual friend that Joshua had been suspended twice and was barely passing. That Jessica was working retail and Marcus had disappeared entirely. "That's good," Brian said, because what else could he say? "I saw your Facebook. You look happy." "I'm doing all right." They stood in silence while other shoppers maneuvered around them, annoyed at the blockage. Joshua's eyes were red-rimmed like he'd been crying or not sleeping or both. "I'm sorry," Joshua finally said, the words tumbling out. "For everything. For being a brat. For the phone thing. For not appreciating what you did. You were my dad. You were more my dad than Marcus ever was. You still are, in my heart." Brian felt his chest tighten. Part of him wanted to hug this kid, take him home, fix everything like he used to. But he'd spent a year in therapy learning that you can't save people who don't want to be saved, can't parent children whose mother undermines you, can't fix broken families alone. "I appreciate that, Joshua," he said carefully. "I hope you find your way. I really do. You're a smart kid with a lot of potential. Can we get coffee sometime? Talk." Brian saw the hope in Joshua's eyes and hated what he had to say next. "I don't think that's a good idea. Your mom made it clear what my role is, or isn't. And I need to respect those boundaries. For my own peace. But I'm asking. Not her. Me. You're still a minor. And I'm not your father. Remember?" The words came out harder than Brian intended. He softened his voice. "Look, when you're 18, if you want to reach out, I'll be open to coffee. But right now, I can't go back to that situation. I can't be part-time or conditional. It's not healthy for either of us." Joshua's face crumpled, but he nodded, fighting tears. "Okay. I get it. I screwed up and now I have to live with it. You were a kid. Your mom made adult choices. Don't carry all that weight. She regrets it. She cries about it. I'm sure she does. But regret doesn't undo damage. It just proves you finally understand what you lost." Brian put his hand on Joshua's shoulder briefly. "Take care of yourself. Really. I mean that." He moved past with his cart, his eyes stinging. He made it to his truck before he had to sit for a moment, breathing deeply. It hurt. God, it hurt. But he'd meant what he said. He couldn't go back. Not to that house, that dynamic, that version of himself who gave everything and got nothing. He started the engine and drove home. Sarah was there, making breakfast, music playing. She looked up when he came in and immediately saw his face. "You okay?" Ran into Joshua at the store. She came over and hugged him. Didn't offer platitudes or advice. Just held him. That was enough. 2 years after the divorce, Brian sat on his back deck watching the sunset. Sarah was inside making dinner. They'd moved in together 6 months ago and were talking about getting married eventually, but in that easy way people do when they're not desperate or afraid. Just content. His phone buzzed. A Facebook message from an unknown account. He almost deleted it without reading, but something made him open it. Mr. Johnson, this is Joshua. I'm 16 now. I got my own phone finally. I wanted you to know I'm doing better. Got my grades up. I'm on the school soccer team. Mom and I moved into our own apartment. It's small but it's ours. Marcus is completely out of the picture. I still think about you a lot. About the things you taught me. I realize now what I had and what I lost. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to say thank you for those 6 years. You were the best dad I ever had, even if I didn't appreciate it then. I hope you're happy. You deserve it. Brian read it 3 times. He sat with it for 20 minutes, watching the sky turn orange and purple. Then he typed back. Joshua, I'm really proud of you for turning things around. It takes strength to recognize mistakes and grow from them. Keep working hard. Keep being kind. Keep becoming the man I always knew you could be. I wish you nothing but the best. Take care of yourself. Brian. He didn't offer coffee. Didn't suggest meeting up. Didn't reopen the door. But he also didn't ignore the message or respond with bitterness. He'd found the middle ground, acknowledgement without re-engagement. Sarah came out with 2 glasses of wine. Everything okay? Yeah, Brian said, accepting the glass. Everything's okay. And it was. He'd lost 6 years to a relationship that wasn't healthy. He'd loved a child who wasn't his and paid the price for it. But he'd also learned what he was worth, what he wouldn't tolerate, what peace felt like. He'd learned that walking away from toxicity wasn't abandonment. It was survival. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in dysfunction. The sun set completely. Sarah leaned against his shoulder. Inside, dinner was cooking and home felt like home again, not a battlefield or a transaction, just a place where he was valued. Brian had finally found what he'd been searching for all along, a partnership between equals. No power games. No conditional love. Just 2 people who chose each other every day with full respect and full honesty. He took a sip of wine and let the past settle where it belonged, behind him. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, that felt like possibility instead of threat. He was free. And that was enough.